a prisoner on someone else's planet. Here's your look at the McFarlane toys. Spawn, Omega Spawn. Pulled from his cosmic lair among the stars, Omega Spawn is now trapped on the planet Earth due to Spawn's unintentional tear in time. Incredibly powerful, Omega Spawn seeks to enslave humanity and other Hellspawns that have been displaced from their homes. He plans and manipulates various factions from his compound Omega Island to do his bidding. While we all try our best to avoid any unintentional tears in time, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of Omega Spawn that we could have a look at in this review. You may notice already that I've drawn the camera back just a little bit, freeing up some space for some slightly taller figures. I'm also going to grab my tape measure, as I always do here, and we're going to measure off to the top of Omega Spawn's head. It's a pretty big figure, but again, we'll bring in other comparisons of figures in a moment. Omega Spawn, though, in the meantime, stands 8 inches in height, or the figure's 20 centimeters tall. Honestly, the real reason why I did bring the camera back as far as I did was to get the chance to bring back in mega-sized Violator. Now, while Omega Spawn is still a tall figure, to be fair, he's nowhere near the height of what Violator is. In fact, he only goes about to, I would say, the elbow area. Though a Spawn that's about a little more accurate in size to him, here's what he looks like next to Gunslinger Spawn. He's not as big, mind you, as Omega Spawn, but with factoring in the hat, he's about the same size. And then an average-sized Spawn figure, we just recently had a look at Plague. Plague I would give an average-sized build and height to, and I think Omega Spawn, obviously, as you can see, is a lot taller than characters like that. Same size as Gunslinger Spawn. Nowhere near the height, though, as mega-sized Violator. What's sad, really, is unless you count the display stand that comes included with the figure, well, Omega Spawn doesn't have anything else packaged along with him. The figure's not too big, that I don't think is using a lot of plastic to start off with. You know, to be still fair, he's still bigger than a regular figure like a Plague, but I do wish that there could have still been plastic afforded to the figure, like some effects, energy effects that could have been inside his, or wrapped around his hands, for example. Something made of translucent green or translucent yellow plastic. Something even illustrated on the back of the box. Unfortunately, though, he doesn't come with anything but a display stand, which I guess we could take some time to look at right now. Same circular black stand as we've seen already countless times before. One singular peg up at the top there. And then a Spawn logo, of course, printed down below here. This does clip onto the bottoms of his feet. In fact, the figure does have peg holes on the undersides of both of his feet. And I would certainly encourage, when picking this figure up for yourself, if you do make use of this, don't put this to the side and assume that you can have the figure just standing on his own. Because I've noticed, at least for myself, that Omega Spawn has some difficult time to stand. You really do have to adjust some allowances to get him to stand properly. That being said, let's go ahead and pick the figure up right now. He's not as heavy as perhaps he may look. He is still made of good solid plastic. Nothing really feels hollow on him, but the plastic that they've used seems a little more lighter than the likes of, say, Violator. Granted, I know Violator's a bigger figure. Getting a closer look at the head sculpt, one thing I really think that this figure does well is the sculpting of the piece. Now, I think in most of the source material for Omega Spawn, the markings that he has on the mask, of course, seems, I think, blending better a little more to the horns that he has on the sides of his head. It's not quite supposed to be the same color, but I think it's supposed to be a little bit more closer than what we get here for the figure. They've done a nice enough job of actually transitioning a little bit of that brown that comes from the horns onto the mask portion of his face. I do think the coloring is really good on this one as well. The coloring of both his teeth, top and bottom. The inside of his mouth doesn't have any articulation, and it's sadly just as black as it is the mask around him. The eyes are nicely colored, bright and green, so they stand out nice and well. And again, he's got all these cool spikes all around the top of his head. Not to mention, again, I love the sculpting of the horns. It's one of the better looking head sculpts we've gotten from a Spawn figure in recent memory. When it comes to his body, of course, many of this checks off the box things of what like Spawn's costuming normally would be. So of course you've got the M kind of shape here on the front of his torso, and he's got a few little chains there also wrapped around the front of his body. In addition to that, he's also got some spikes there on the neighboring shoulders, some additional red that he's got there as well, and all these cool protruding spikes, not only on his forearm, but up the arm as well. All of the spikes, though, by the way, are a harder plastic, so you'll feel it right away when you're trying to move the figure's elbows or even his forearms around. You're going to feel those pricking against your skin. Easily, though, the one thing that's causing some problems for this figure to stand, is probably stating the obvious, is this big fur cape that he has on the back of his body. It's still soft plastic, but there's so much of it and so much plastic being dedicated to it that it does cause a lot more weight to the back of the figure. And obviously, when it comes to the figure standing, unless you get the knees, I find to be bent just a slight bit. If you have them standing straight, I find the figure tends to lean backwards and often falls a lot over. One thing, again, I do really like about the figure is the additional paint that they've added. There's not really a lot of paint, to be fair, on this figure. Mostly you can see it's just a molded black figure in plastic, but they have still, at least when it comes to the spikes, added some nice additional darker, almost kind of the same color, similar to what he would have had here for the cape. It's almost more of a, almost a off mustard yellow color that they've added. And really all of the spikes, nothing seems really left out here. All of the spikes get afforded that little bit of color, and that's actually the same on both the sides. Again, he's got some of that also here on the fronts of his fronts of his thighs, I should say, as well. The longer of the spikes seem to be on more the side. The shorter of the spikes, as you can see, actually more is just like coarse sandpaper on the front of the legs, but at least, again, they get afforded some paint. I do like the use of the red, and the color of red that they used as well isn't a very dark red either, so it really helps to pop on the figure's black plastic. Again, the only thing I really would say about this figure is like the cape is really heavy on the back of the figure. And when I initially took this guy out of the packaging, I had his knees straight, his legs completely straight the first time around. And I find it does put a lot of stress then on his ankles. And you really have to rely on those ankles then to keep the figure stable. I find it helps actually just to bend the knees a little bit to kind of compensate for some of the weight the figure actually then has to bear on his own. Still, it's going to be a bit of a problem, so I would certainly encourage. One thing you can also do, too, is bring the arms forward. That might help just a little bit. But by all means, yes, definitely use a display stand. It comes included with the figure after all. You might as well use it anyways. For the figure's articulation, let's have a look at the head sculpt first. Head is, surprisingly a lot more posable than you would think. You would just imagine that with this much fur sculpted around his shoulders, not to mention here on the back, that when it comes to Omega Spawn's head, it would be a lot harder to rotate. And not the case at all. In fact, the head rotates all the way around first of all. And you can then take the head, you can move it up, you can move it down. You can also rock it back and forth as well. They seem to have allotted a lot of clearance underneath the head sculpt of Omega Spawn. And there's just enough space. There's just enough space here on the back of the figure's body that rotating the head doesn't seem to be a problem at all. When it comes to his arms, the arms do hinge out. Now, I've noticed on the figure's arms here, first of all, the joints are really tight. That's not a bad thing at all. But when he has all these additional larger spikes here sticking out the tops of his shoulders, it does cause a little more problems because you can see it's going to brush up against the top of the fur cape that he has. So you're not going to be able to bring the arms out necessarily at a full 90 degrees. You're only going to be able to successfully pull about a 45. You can take the arms still and move them forward and back. You can't really rotate them all the way around for the obvious reasons. The figure does have not a bicep swivel necessarily, but you can rotate him at the forearm. Figure only possesses, though, a single hinge on the elbow. You can take the hands and rotate them all the way around, as well as there's a hinge back and forth. The upper torso is on a ball joint. The lower torso, as you can see as well, also is on a similar ball joint. Unfortunately, though, as you're moving the joints around, especially the lower abdomen area, it does result in a bit of a gap between the abdomen section and the tops of his waist. This is softer plastic, of course, by the way, to conceal the joint. So unless you have it dead set right in the middle here, every time you rotate it here to the side, you're going to notice that very obvious gap start to develop. The legs do hinge out. The legs seem pretty tight. Not too loose at all. The only thing that's really loose here in this figure of mine is the ankle pivot and the toe articulation as well, which we'll get to more in a moment. Figure does, though, have a double hinge on the knee and has already discussed already. There's also the hinge joint up and down here on the ankle. You can rock it back and forth. And yeah, there's toe articulation as well. I really do like actually also is the way they've sculpted the feet here, where the bottoms of the feet, even though it does cause some problems with the figure actually standing, they didn't just defeat it by making a completely flat-soled foot. They actually did sculpt some toes in there. They didn't, granted, paint any of the nails. Neither that or actually the nails on his hands have been painted. I suppose that could be one thing that they could have gone back in and painted as well. But, for what it is, actually, there's a lot of paint going on for the figure. Granted, he's a little top-heavy. I mean, that goes without saying, obviously, for the sizing of how much plastic he's got on the back of his body. The key to successfully getting Omega Spawn to stand, I've noticed one thing, is to crunch him slightly forward, his abdomen area, bend the knees, and that will also help to compensate some weight that would normally have been put all on the ankles. You really don't want to have all the weight sitting on the ankles, because at least on my figure, the ankles are way too loose to hold the figure on his own. By just sort of compensating it with the knees, the tops of the thighs, and again the abdomen area, you can get the figure technically to stand even without a display stand. Though if you are looking to display him in any sort of dynamic poses, or in my case actually having the figure spinning around on a turntable, it's best advised to use that display stand. It comes included with the figure after all. You're not necessarily cheating anybody or cheating yourself by using a display stand. Any figure, even on my shelf now, that I think is going to stand on their own, I still always use a display stand, because I'd hate to think I come down the next morning to look at my collection shelf only to find a couple of figures fallen off onto the floor. Omega Spawn, for obvious reasons, even though you can really stand him on his own, with the amount of weight that he has in plastic on the back of his body, it is probably the best idea just to use the display stand anyways. Short of maybe just the looseness that he has already developed in his ankles, that's about the only thing I really would wish this figure could have done a little bit better with. And of course, including some energy effects for his hands. The figure doesn't use technically a lot of plastic. I mean, I'm not one that manufactures toys, but I think they could have easily afforded some additional energy effects that could have clipped into his hand. But I'm sure it's something if I go and spend a little bit of time going through my totes of Spawn figures, I'm probably sure I could find something comparable enough that can go along here with Omega Spawn. We just recently had a look at the oversized, I think it was Ninja Spawn. Was it Ninja Spawn? Maybe it was Ninja Spawn. That came included with a spell and energy effect that clipped into his hand. I don't know if it's going to do the job, but I'm certainly going to check after this review and see if I can find something suitable enough to be held in Omega Spawn's hands. What do you guys think of the figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. Is this a figure you'd be considering to pick up for your collection space? If so, let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of it. And once again, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the brand new Omega Spawn that we can have a look at in this review. If you guys certainly enjoyed this video and you don't mind doing a solid, why not hit it with a like? If you're loving the content you guys are seeing and do want to certainly stick around for more, then two things you can certainly do for yourself is to hit the subscribe button first, second, turning on the bell notification. So you're going to get always those reminders whenever new videos are going to be popping up. Also as well, if you have a little bit of time on your hands, popping up at the very end of this video will also be a playlist of other Spawn things that I've looked at in previous reviews. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.